bitches.
Hi, hello, and welcome back.
It is almost Valentine's Day, or it just was Valentine's Day. I don't remember
I
when
don't
this episode
know.
releases.
To be honest, I don't know.
I know it's around Valentine's Day though because we're covering the Valentine's mystery, um, which actually doesn't have too much to do with Valentine's Day. I mean, it does a little bit. It happened a couple days before Valentine's Day, and it did happen to a couple of sweethearts. Um, but I apologize in advance because when I found this case, I was like, this looks interesting. And then I took a deep fucking dive and I have 9 pages of notes. So I just
So,
need you to be ready.
just for a little background for those who don't understand, we had everything planned out for the longest fucking time. Like, we had everything ready to go. We were going to do like a Valentine's Day thing. And then she's like, hey, we can't do it this week because of these reasons. Okay, that's fine. We'll do it next week. And then I was like, you know what? I haven't even done any research. And she goes, it's fine. I fell down a rabbit hole. Okay, next week we'll do it. Didn't do it the next week. She goes, I'm still not done yet. I was like, what do you mean you're still not done yet? I also haven't even started researching. You know what? I think we should just do one of these
Yeah,
because
I don't think you're going
there's
to
so
need to
much
do any
information.
research.
And I was like,
So,
okay, that works.
I'm going to give my sources first thing. There's a podcast called Our True Crime Podcast, and they covered this case in episode 198, Forever Valentine. I got some of my information from there, and from their sources, I found a few other sources. CBS 17 was the local news that covered it. The Fay Observer is, I think, a newspaper in the area. And then the rabbit hole that I tripped and had then dove headfirst into um, was the Long Dance podcast, which is an investigative podcast. And it is 8 episodes long and it only covers this case. So,
How
yeah,
long are their
it
episodes?
about an hour each. So I listened to their podcast and that's where I got the majority of my information. Um, now, don't at me unless you do the same thing as me, but a lot of the times when I listen to podcasts, I listen to them on 1.5 or 2 times speed because my brain processes things a little bit faster than, and I can't handle when people talk super slow. But
All right, Will.
that's not the point. The point is I listened to their whole podcast, and that's where I got most of this information from. Um, but I want to start this episode off with which I don't know, you might. If you have any information or know anything that might help solve this decades old case, please contact the Orange County, North Carolina Sheriff's Office at 919-644-3050. And I'm going to give that information again at the end of the podcast. Um, they're pretty sure they know who did it. They just don't have um, enough evidence for a conviction. And the person that they believe did it is still alive. We're going to talk about the victims. We're going to talk about the crime. We're going to talk about 3 suspects, only one of which are still living. We're going to talk about a police scandal kind of thing that happened that is also not helping with the non conviction of any of these people. None of them were even actually charged. They were all questioned, but no one was charged. And then we're going to talk about what we think happened and what the Long Dance podcast thinks happened. So, this happened in Durham, North Carolina, at Watts. Sorry, that's farther down in my notes. Watts Nursing School and Hospital. It's like a teaching hospital, I believe, or it was at the time. I actually don't know if the hospital still even exists, but I think it does.
When did this
The
happen?
people, huh? This
What
happened in
year?
19. Where did the year go? February 12th, 1979? Well, shit. Hold on. I can't find it in my notes. It'd be easier to just Google it.
You said decades old, and I was like, wait, did she say the year? Because you might like talking fast and hearing people talk fast, but I have a processing disorder, so the faster you talk, the less likely I'm going to hear it.
It's only funny because 1971, February 12th, 1971, because you listen to me all the time and I talk this fast all the time.
And you know what? Sometimes I get what you're saying like a second later.
Sometimes, if Brittany's
I
listening to the
really
podcast,
try to fucking focus.
sometimes when Brittany's listening to the podcast, I can always understand us, but sometimes I'll be listening and I'll be like, which one of us is talking right now? And I'm like, if I can't even tell if it's my voice, how do other people tell our voices apart? But
I
Brittany
guess I'm
says
just
that she
gonna
can
have to
always
talk
tell.
down here.
Yeah, right. And usually I can figure it out because, like, there was something the other day. Fuck. It was like a phrase, and I thought it was me talking, but it's a phrase that you say all the time. And I was like, hold
Oh
up,
fuck.
that's not me. Like, but anyway,
Hmm.
that was a little
What's the
sidetrack
phrase?
there.
Do you remember?
Okay, huh? What
Do
was
you
the
remember
phrase?
the
No, but
phrase?
if you say it today, I will
Ah, okay.
probably scream at you because I'll be like,
Okay.
that was the phrase.
Okay.
Anyway, Jessie McBane was 19 years old, and Patricia Mann was 20 years old. She was a student at the Watt School of Nursing, which is where, not where this happened, but close to where this happened. Um, just to give a little profile on both of them to start out, because we're going to do a lot of talking about the people that potentially harmed them, but I'd rather give more of the attention to them. So we're going to start with talking about them. Jessie McBane was popular, athletic, and smart in high school, and then went on to North Carolina State University. And in high school, he was voted most likely to succeed. Um, he played football,
We love
and
a successful person.
but he also loved a good prank and liked to party in the cornfield with his friends, which is the most Midwest ass shit I've ever heard of in my life. I read that and I was like, are we
Well,
sure this didn't happen in Indiana?
well, did you say he? Well, wait. He's from North Carolina.
Yeah, they both are.
Okay, maybe Indiana's more south than
Yeah, and I don't know.
we realize. I mean, it's pretty racist. So, okay, anyways,
Um, he was 6'2" and very strong, is how he was described. And it also said his friends referred to him as Haas. So he was like a big dude. It was said that people said of him that he put his all into everything he did, never looked for a fight, and made friends with everyone. He loved the show Hee Haw and would recite the show the next morning. Like if he went to school the next morning after watching it and his friends hadn't seen it, or even if they had, he would like recite parts of the show to make them laugh. He had an older sister who talks a lot, I believe, or not a lot, but talks some in the podcast. The the long dance. Jesus Christ, I can speak. And a younger brother. Oh, not only was he on the football team, he was co-captain of the football team, and he was in the student government. And then Jesse actually introduced Pat's cousin Carolyn, who talks a lot in the Long Dance podcast. A lot of the information comes from her. Um, he introduced her to his friend David, who she later married, and they kind of come in and out of the story because they're some of the like witnesses to things that happened. Um, Patricia Mann, who you will hear me refer to as both Pat and Trisha throughout this, based on who was talking, you could tell different people called her different things. Um, so depending on who was talking as I was taking my notes, depends on what I call her. Um, she was a nursing student at Watt School of Nursing. When she was younger, she and her cousins would play army in the backyard, and she and her cousin Carolyn would play nurses for the wounded army men, which is kind of cute because they said that was always her dream, was to be a nurse and to help people. So that was kind of a cute little story. Um, but when she was growing up, when they were playing nurse, she actually was saying that she wanted to be a teacher. So like she was always like service minded, but anyway, then she changed her mind and decided she wanted to become a nurse. She was a good girl. She always followed the rules. She always did what she was supposed to do. Um, she didn't, I don't know, she didn't freak rules. Um, and then her family, this part was kind of confusing because during the first episode, her cousin's mic was like not as good, and then the later episodes they fixed it. Um, but the family would go on Sunday drives and they would spend time with friends of the family on these Sunday drives. I don't know if they like stopped somewhere or if they met, like I don't know. It was like a
Like
thing
had
in the
like a
70s to go
picnic kind of
cruising.
thing.
Like I don't know.
Yeah.
And
That
that's
was
where she
back when gas could just be used whenever, wherever.
right when it was like 14 cents and shit.
Yeah.
Now it's $3 and I'm like, "Hey, gas is cheap today." The fuck?
Gas is really cheap in South Carolina. I'm not gonna say.
It's
It's
been
like
cheaper
two.
here, but not cheap. It's been like 275.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's been like 250 here. I was gonna say $3. Holy shit.
Yeah. Um oh, and then towards the end of her life, she was at nursing school still, but she was missing her family and missing Jesse, and she was really miserable and was talking about leaving nursing school, but Carolyn talked her out of it, her cousin Carolyn, and later she kind of felt some survivor's guilt because of that, because she was like, if she had dropped out of school and come home, none of this would have ever happened, um, which is a really hard feeling to have. So that is our victims. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the setting and then dive right on into the crime. Um,
Dun dun dun.
right. So the setting of this is Durham, North Carolina, which is where the nursing school was, but was about an hour away from where Jesse lived and where Pat grew up. Durham, North Carolina at the time had a reputation for high crime rates, racial tension, and economic upheaval. So it was not the best neighborhood. She grew up in a town named Sanford, which was described as a town like Mayberry. So it was a really safe community. Nobody locked their doors. Everybody knew everybody. Um, wasn't so very different from where she's at now, or where she was at when this happened. Um, as for their relationship, everyone said that they were head over heels. Oh, to be 20 again. I say that, but I was 21 when I met Brittany. So.
I was gonna say, wait a second. Were you were you
But
the
they were
same
high
age?
school sweethearts.
Oh yeah. No. Fuck my high school
So, and some of the right, some of their friends actually worried, and I think friends and family actually worried that they were getting too deep into each other too quickly, and actually reported that not too long before their abduction, they were having some tension in their relationship, and they were actually on and off like dating the year leading up to the everything, because one of their biggest tensions was that Pat was a good girl and she was saving herself for marriage, um, and all that stuff. That's a whole different rabbit hole we could go down, but not today. Um, so that was putting a strain on their relationship because Jesse was like, I don't give a shit about that. So once Jesse went to college and there were other more like worldly women, for lack of a better term, he was struggling with fidelity and not pushing her to have sex because,
I
yeah,
feel like I feel like that time everyone was struggling with fidelity. Like,
yeah. The
I'm not
70s was
sitting here
wild.
saying
I
that.
wasn't here, but
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not sitting here
from what I've
saying like
heard,
everybody in the 70s was like cheating on everybody, but I just feel like,
I feel like people were a lot more open though. Like there were a lot more
yeah,
open relationships and a lot more, well, not more than now, but
I think back then it was more like shush, like it's
yeah,
open one sided maybe, or um the what is it? It's like hidden behind, like, oh, like Freddie Mercury. He was dating one girl, but then he was seeing guys, but that was kind of like naughty, and
yeah,
that was actually I think back in the 70s when that happened. All of that happened. So I don't know.
yeah.
I just
It
feel like
was
every single time someone says something about the 70s, it's there's cheating. No,
well, and then
stop.
wasn't the Manson family in the 70s or was that the 60s? And that was like a whole thing. Anyway,
That
um,
time
so yeah,
period, everyone
that
was
was an
cheating.
issue. Um, but they did meet up every weekend. And not too long before this happened, Jesse actually even gave Pat what they referred to as a pre-engagement ring. So I'm guessing like a promise ring.
Yeah, probably.
Um, so that happened. Then on February 12th, 1971, Pat sat for her state board exams. And after the test, Pat had planned to catch a ride back to Sanford, her hometown, with one of her friends. But that friend was ready to go, and Pat was still taking her test. So she told her to go ahead and go, and that she would find a different way home, or she would just stay for the weekend. So she stayed at Watt in Durham, North Carolina. That weekend, Jesse had come home. It was around his birthday, but he had come home for the weekend to Sanford, and his mother hadn't had time to bake him a cake for his birthday. So instead, she offered to let him borrow the family car that Friday night to go to the Valentine's dance at Watts Nursing School with Pat, which I thought was super cute. Like, I didn't get to make you a birthday cake, but here's the car.
Go
um,
have fun.
and Jesse, his mom said that Jesse was so excited when he left home that night that he forgot the Valentine's present that he had purchased for Pat, which was like some chocolates, I think. So she didn't know he was coming. He surprised her. And then they went to the dance, which was at the school, um, which is also super cute because, like, colleges don't really do dances anymore.
No, they do
I feel like
soirees.
people
I'm just kidding.
just
I
go
don't
to,
know.
like, the bar. Like, people don't, they don't do, like, I mean, I
Yeah,
guess they do parties at, like, frat houses and stuff, but
I think nowadays a lot of the activities are not necessarily shunned, but they're like not as, you have to be super active within the community of like school to actually go to those things.
yeah.
Because I think in my entirety of college, I went to one thing, like one dance thing, and it was for um not even a benefit or anything. It was just a fun like little prom night kind of thing, but it wasn't even a prom night. And
Right.
that was the only thing I ever heard of, and that was my freshman year. And after that, I didn't hear anything of any type of dance that I could go to, or that like wasn't club related. And
Right. I feel like that's more the
I,
vibe it is now.
yeah, and so it was the bars, it was frat parties. I think back then they actually had like, come
Events.
cool, join
Like,
the super cool dance we're having this night. Like I think it was just a lot better or easier that way.
yeah. So they did that. And then sometime between 11 and 11:30, they left the dance to go parking, which I think is the cutest thing ever. Especially because she's saving herself for marriage. So parking is not even sex. Like they're just gonna go make out.
I was gonna sit here and be like, they gonna go fuck.
Nope, nope, because Pat's saving
Listen, I'm
herself for
thinking
marriage.
Greece, okay? I'm thinking Greece.
So they were last seen driving north towards an undeveloped neighborhood, which was referred to as a sort of lover's lane for the college students. Um, Later, the car will be found in that neighborhood on a parked on a cul-de-sac. Um, so it's a neighborhood that's like under construction. So there's like an abandoned cul-de-sac that nobody's around where they were parking. Um, Around 1 o'clock in the morning, the house mother at the dorm was looking for Pat because she never came back. Um, so like she asked the other girls on the floor. She was looking. They checked all the libraries. I think they had somebody come unlock the library. They went back to the place where the dance was, and then they didn't find her. So they called the police, but like the police always do, they said they had to wait until she was missing for 24 hours to file a report or do anything. The next day, the next, I don't even think it was morning. I think it was like late morning or early afternoon. Jesse's dad called Carolyn, who was also at the nursing school. I think I forgot to say that. She was also at the nursing school. So Jesse's dad called Carolyn looking for him because he never came home. And the last they knew, he was going to the college. All of the friends and families, because remember, this is a small Mayberry like town, so all of Pat's families and all of Jesse's families and all of their friends compared their stories and what they knew about the couple's plans for the night and realized that like something was wrong. Like Pat never came back, Jesse never came back. Where are they? Because they weren't that like everybody was okay with their relationship, so there was no reason for them to elope. Like if they wanted to get married, they could have got married. Like so
It just
everyone was
didn't
like, what?
make sense.
Yeah, everyone's like, what the fuck? So Pat's friends at the nursing school started calling all of the local emergency rooms to make sure that they hadn't been admitted or like there weren't any unidentified bodies or people out there at one of the hospitals. And obviously there were not. Um, so they called the police again, and the police said, "Oh, they're probably just off having fun and not calling to check in. You know, they're lovebirds. They might have eloped. Like they're at that
Yeah,
age
okay.
and didn't do anything."
They
Um,
might have eloped. I
and
feel like they were so close with their family. I mean, I don't know these guys personally, but I just feel like they were close enough
yes,
to their family that this is not something that they would have done.
right. Well, and it just that doesn't make sense. Like it just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. If they were gonna elope, why would they have gone to the dance? Why would they have done any of that? And with her being such a good girl who always followed the rules and always checked in, it doesn't make any sense that she would let her family worry like that.
Yeah.
Um, so Jesse's sister, his older sister Gail, um, drove up there. She's like, "What the fuck?" And she's looking.
We going, bitches.
Right, so she's driving around just trying to find the car, and she found the car parked in the cul-de-sac in the undeveloped neighborhood, and finally police started a search for Pat and Jesse. The car was found locked with Pat's purse inside. A pair of folded up pantyhose were tucked under the passenger seat, and the keys were gone. So it didn't exactly look like they had eloped at this point. The police were
Yeah.
finally like agreeing and helping. There were search parties because there was a lot of woods around this area. So there were search
Hmm.
parties walking the woods looking for them, and 3 airplanes searching by air. Um, because it was the 70s and like phone books were still a thing and operators were still, I mean, I guess operators are still a thing, but like who does that?
It's very rare. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Random people kept calling the families of Pat and Jesse to tell them their theories of what happened, which is so fucked up. I can't even, but it's the same shit that people do on Facebook and shit. Like
Mhm.
on the scanner groups, like when there's an accident, people will like theorize and talk like, oh, they must have been drunk. And like, bitch, you were talking about someone's
It's
family
them
member, first of all.
drugs. Yeah. Like,
Yeah. It's
back
like,
off. Let the police handle whatever they're doing.
and you
Even if
don't
you don't
even
fucking
know.
trust
Like,
them. If
you're
you don't
just,
have to trust them, that's fine. Like, just let it be.
yeah, you're just making up your own story, your own narrative to fit what you want to have happened, and you're probably wrong. So fuck off. Um, but to call the actual
Snaps to that.
families, honestly though, to call the
Right?
actual families is so like they're already thinking of the worst things. At least I would be. I would be imagining the worst fucking possibility. And for people to call them and randomly tell them their theories was just fucked up. And people continued to call um I can't remember her name right now, but Jesse's mom. They continued to call her for years after. That's
Jesse's love
no.
gotta go out.
No. Um
No.
and
Okay.
then all of in addition to that happening, the nursing students and like that whole campus is living in terror because they're like, what the fuck? And then that friend that didn't wait for Pat and went ahead and went home without her was like having severe survival guilt and blaming herself because she was like, if I would have just been patient and waited another hour for her to finish her, or hour or two for her to finish her test, this all wouldn't have happened. Which is a really hard thing, but like also not her fault. The only fault here is the person who did it.
Yeah, and
Um,
survivor's guilt can really fuck somebody up.
yeah, it can.
The
Um,
what ifs. It's always the what ifs.
well, especially if you can in some way blame yourself. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, if like I had a friend who passed away from cancer when I was younger. There was no way that that was my fault and I still had
Mhm.
survivor's guilt. If there was any way that I could have like made that my fault, I can't even imagine because I already had to go to therapy for I'm still in therapy, not necessarily because of that, but like that kind of tripped my mental health
Mhm.
journey. So I can't even imagine. Um Later, I think it was about 2 weeks later and several miles away, two bodies were found. And they were suspected to be Jesse and Pat. And Pat's family found out on the news that these bodies had been found. The news
No.
leaked the information before the police had a chance to call Pat's mother. Yeah. Now, the bodies weren't confirmed to be theirs yet, but that was a fuck up. Because, first of all, the news should not have had that information before the
Oh,
family.
fuck the news, man. Oh my
Yeah.
god. That's
They
horrible.
definitely should not have released it. So, super fucked up. They The bodies were found by a surveyor that was doing some work near the woods, in part of what is now Duke Forest, but at the time it was privately owned land. He was doing surveying in the area and came upon bodies that were partially covered by leaves and other debris. This, I'm just gonna say trigger warning because this is probably the like grossest part that I'm going to talk about. Um, their hands were bound and they were both tied back to back, like there was a tree, and they both had their backs against the tree on opposite sides, and they were tied to the tree. Um, they showed signs of having been tortured before being strangled to death but there was no evidence of sexual assault. The authorities, like in the case file, the description was it looked like they were strangled and then let down and then strangled and then let down over a period of time to the point where their shoes still had mud on them and there were little troughs where their feet had been thrashing around. And authorities said the couple was also stabbed several times. No valuables were taken, and Pat still wore her ring. So it was not a robbery and it was not a sexual assault. It was just murder
Before
for
you
the
get
sake of
into like
murder.
who the culprits could be and all of that, what it has I wonder if anyone's actually looked into the similarities of like other murders across the state or states to see if maybe there's like a link to it, like a motive, like not a the yeah. It's been one of those days. Uh Not a motive, but like a moniker, like this is how they kill the person, like
Yeah,
this is how the serial killer does it.
we will talk about that
Okay.
with one of the suspects. We will talk about that.
Okay.
It's ironically not the suspect that I think did it, but we will talk about that.
Okay.
So yes, they did do that. Detectives from the Orange County and Durham Police Department and the State Bureau of Investigation all worked on the case, but being different bureaus with different jurisdictions, they did not always share their information, and therefore the case went cold. So nobody could decide whose dick was the biggest when they were actually all tiny. So they fucked it all up. And yeah, had they shared information from the start, this could have turned out differently. Would it have? I don't know. But frequently we see that in these kinds of cases that happens, and it pisses me off. So, Orange County Sheriff Investigator Tim Horn and Don Hunter reopened the case in 2010, and they make a lot of progress, narrowing in on one main suspect, um, who we will talk about in a little bit, who worked at Watts Hospital at the time. Then, in June of 2018, the podcast The Long Dance brought the 46-year-old murder and investigative efforts to a larger audience, which has led to more tips and witnesses coming forward. And because of this podcast, the detectives received offers from outside agencies to use advanced DNA retrieval methods to test small amounts of DNA, because the rope was there was a rope that was used as the murder weapon that strangled them. There were 3 distinct DNA patterns found on the rope, so it would be Jesse, Pat, and then ideally the murderer's DNA, but there was trace amounts. And at the time, in the 70s they didn't do DNA really, but in 2010 when they did finally get the DNA to test it, they couldn't like isolate it enough to match it to someone, if that makes sense. Because there just wasn't enough. They could tell that there were 3 different people's DNA there, but it wasn't enough to match it to like the suspect's DNA. So then
One day
the
though, one day.
right, and like especially with all of the like these advanced companies that have like this advanced technology coming and offering to help, like I, I think eventually now will the suspect still be alive when that happens, because he is currently in his late 80s. Um, that's a different, but still it would give closure to the family just to know. I think that they already know, but to be have certainty, I guess. Then the two their funerals were both held on same days across town from each other. The same day across town from each other. So sad. Now, I have 3 suspects, 2 of which are deceased. The third suspect is still alive. Um, this first one is the one that, in my opinion, is the least likely to actually be. Okay, let me preface this. Some of the investigators said that they don't believe that one person could have possibly done this. Okay. I don't, mm, everything I've looked at and everything I've read and listened to, I do think one person could have done this if they in some way incapacitated one of the two.
I feel like if the person was, hear me out on this. I feel like the guy could have, if it was a guy, if it was the guy who did it, I feel like the guy could have grabbed the girl with a gun. I mean, guns were big back then.
Right.
And if the guy loved her as much as he did and showed himself to do all of that, whatever the case may be, then
Yeah.
that would have been an easy way to get him to like lay down, because he could have easily like held on to her and then twisted the gun to the dude if the dude tried to run away, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. I personally, I think one person could have done it because it also, like, it said that their bodies showed signs of torture. So he could have, like, knocked them out.
I mean, if
Or
they're
at the
busy
time,
making
that
out,
he could have
you could
used
literally,
some
if
kind of, well, yeah, or he could have used some kind of, like, what's the chloroform?
chloroform, you have to really hold on to like here for him to like breathe it in. He's got to be breathing it for at least like a minute and a half, 2 minutes before he starts passing out.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not like an
anyway, something.
instantaneous thing.
He could
Could
have
have
done
he
something.
could have punched the fuck out of that dude and knocked his ass out, and then just been like, "Come on, bitch, you coming with me?"
Yeah. Who knows? I personally think one person could have done it. I mean, I think of some of the other true crime cases that I've seen and heard of, and I'm like, if one person could do that, one person could do this. Um,
One person can
so
do a lot of things.
that's my, like, caveat to what I'm about to say. This person is the least likely suspect in my mind if it was only one person. If it was two people, I think it was this person and one of the other suspects, but we'll get into that later. So this first suspect is James Brandon Ray. He is deceased now. Um, he is a suspect because of an anonymous informant. I say anonymous because the informant was only known to one of the investigators and one of the original investigators of the case, and both and before they could find out who the anonymous informant was, that investigator passed away. So we don't know who
Passed
the
away
anonymous
under
informant is.
mysterious circumstances, or just like
No, I
passed away from
believe it
cold?
was a heart attack.
Probably
He
the
was just
fucking stress of this. I'm stressed
right.
out.
Um, so James Brandon Ray had also, like, he had a collection of photos and news clippings of the abduction, which is a common thing that murderers do, and he had rope similar to that used in the murder in his car. It was tested and it was not the same kind of rope, but it was similar. So don't have rope in your car or you might be accused of murder. Um, I say that, but this guy is like a shitbag, so I'm also not defending him. He'd been stopped by police for using a red light to stop people and impersonate the police in the area where the bodies were found. So, like, he would put a red light on top of his car and pull people over, um, but was not obviously actually a police officer. Um,
That's
June
suspicious
3rd.
as hell.
Yeah, well, that he's
I
not the only
wonder
one of
how
our
he
suspects
got
that does
these people.
that. He's not the only suspect that does that. So it was a common thing back then. Um,
That's fucked up.
in on June 3rd, 1971, he actually wrecked a stolen motorcycle, and obviously the police were called and an ambulance was called, and it was discovered that he had warrants for multiple auto thefts. Because of that, they were able to get a search warrant. Um, And in that search warrant, they found out, or with that search warrant, they found out he had a black wig, 2 blank pistols, which I meant to look up what that means. Does that just mean they don't have a serial number on them? I don't know.
Blank pistols is, I think, like not
Or
fake.
like blank shots. Like,
Like there's
I don't know.
nothing in there.
Okay.
It's an
A
empty
police
pistol, I
badge.
think is what it's implying.
Oh, like not loaded.
Yeah, because like
Got
when
it.
you have like a blank shot, it literally will just make the pop sound, but there's no bullet,
But it
there's no
doesn't.
nothing in it.
Okay.
It's like a,
Okay, that
yeah.
makes a lot more sense. That makes more sense. So a black wig, 2 blank pistols, a police badge, and the keys to 2 lockers, like not storage lockers, but like locker room lockers at Watts Hospital's Ward K. Yeah. Uh huh. They then went back to discuss some of his like earlier trauma and like what maybe made him the way that he is. His father committed suicide when he was a teenager. Um, yeah, and that like affected him super
That'll fuck
deeply, and
anybody up.
yeah, like really fucked up his life. Um, he committed multiple acts of grand theft auto and was in and out of prison throughout his life. He was strange and distant with his wife and son. He worked as a nursing aide at Watts Hospital. I put it in quotes like that because that's what he told people. But he was actually just an orderly there in November 1970 and was fired from there before this event took place. They did 2 different polygraphs because those were still admissible then, and both came back inconclusive, or the results were inconclusive. He, however, had still committed the crime of stealing the motorcycle and breaking parole because he was on parole for the other Grand Theft Auto when he stole the motorcycle. So he got to cool his heels in jail while they were building their case against him, but he was never arrested for the abductions.
Be kind of
They
hard
did
to do
give
your
motive.
deductions on a motorcycle.
Yeah, yeah. They did give motive and means for him, and they actually like specifically said that. So I'm going to specifically say it, but I don't think I actually like spelled it out this detailed on the next 2 suspects, or like I didn't specifically say the word motive and means. But motive for him was potentially a mistaken identity case. There had been another Ford car, so they were in a Ford car of the same make and model earlier in the evening, going through that neighborhood and like other neighborhoods like right there. Earlier in the evening, playing pranks, playing their music really loud and flashing their lights at other vehicles. Um, and James or Jimmy, you're gonna hear me refer to him as both of those, was really pissed off at them and like got out of his car and yelled at them and flipped them off because they were flashing their lights at him. Um, and so there was speculation that he thought that that was the same car and went up to the wrong car, um, and like impersonating an officer, and was identified by Patricia because she would have seen him at the hospital and known who he was. Um, and so there was speculation that he killed them for that reason because he didn't want to go back to prison, which he ends up doing anyway.
Did you
Um,
die in prison?
no, I don't think so. Not this one. Nope. No, he did not. Um, he also was this next part that I'm going to say, you're going to be like, what the fuck? He did it. And this is why I say there's a possibility that it was 2 people because of this part. Um, that evening, around the time that all this happened, he went to, or no, not that evening. Sorry. A couple days before this, he went to one of his neighbor's house because his car was stuck in a ditch, and he asked for rope, if he could borrow the rope to tow the car out of the ditch. And the neighbor was like, this rope isn't strong enough to tow a car out of a ditch, like it'll just break, so no. And then that guy went on, I think he was a farmer, he went on to do something else, and he got a call from his son and was like, hey, you know that guy that came and asked to borrow the rope to tow his car out of the thing? And he was like, yeah. And his son was like, he just came back and stole the rope. And the guy was like, what the fuck? And then that rope was the same exact type of rope used to tie up Jesse McBane and Patricia Mann. Now, does that mean that it's the exact same rope? Not necessarily, but it was the same kind of rope. And if you were looking for a murder weapon but didn't want to go to the hardware store and purchase it yourself, stealing it would be a good option. But not too long, or not too long, right after news broke that the bodies were found, Jimmy Ray sold his car. Just all of a sudden, sold his car.
Very suspicious.
And the man that he sold the car to told investigators that Ray knew a lot of details about the case that he hadn't seen on the news. He knew the rope had been cut into foot-long lengths, and he knew about the prank calls to Mann's mother, which we don't even know about yet. I mean, I kind of mentioned them, but at this point in the trajectory of everything, we don't know that yet. He also claimed that he knew both the victims and was at the dance the night that they went missing. So he's kind of inserting himself into the case right now. But Jimmy Ray told his wife that he never met the victims, and he even went so far as to join the search parties looking for them and taking his dog to help sniff them out. So his story's changing a lot. And then not too long after that, he and his wife get divorced because he's a total shitbag. And he told other girlfriends that he had since then that he had known Patricia Mann and even dated her for a little while.
So,
However,
Gray's stalker?
yeah, he's creepy. However, he had an established alibi and a verified alibi for the time of the abduction and murders. He did have, I don't want to say he was linked to because that makes it sound like there was like evidence linking him to, but he had a connection to the first crime scene where the abduction happened. The night of the disappearance, he actually ran out of gas nearby that neighborhood and went to like a house nearby because that was still a thing you could do in the 70s, and asked for a ride to go get gas, and then continued on his merry way. He also has a connection to this site where the bodies were found because one of his girlfriends of the time, Catherine Bott, her mother lived nearby where the bodies were found. So he has connections to both scenes. The car that he had sold was found, and they did test like things they found in the car against fiber from the rope and hair from both victims, but there was no match. In the 80s, Ray disappeared for a while. Like, nobody knew where he was. And he wasn't in prison or anything. There was no record of him for a while. And then in 1991, he showed up at his son's home and said he would like to stay for a while. And they were estranged. He left his wife and son when his son was very young. And his son had been searching for him all through the 80s. So when he just showed up, his son was like, well, yeah, like, I've been looking for you. I want a relationship with you. About 2 weeks later, James, his son, and his son's wife were sitting on the couch at their house when the FBI busted down the door and arrested James.
Oh my god.
The son never heard from or of his father again. However, in 1991,
What the fuck did he
James,
do?
he was, I don't know, he remarried, and his new wife loved him, said he was a great person. There was no violence in their relationship, and he lived until 2009. The DNA that was found on the rope, they're hoping to test against. They got DNA from Jimmy Ray's son, not from Jimmy Ray himself. Um,
That's
and
enough.
if they get to the point where they're able to test the trace amounts of DNA that were found on the rope, they will test it against his son to either rule him out or confirm that he is the one that did it.
Maybe we'll find out that his mom had an affair and he's actually not
Right?
related.
It's not him. Not him at all.
All right, dig him up.
So that is suspect number one. As I was listening to this, every suspect, I was like, "Fuck yeah, he did it! Fuck yeah, he did it!" And then, but until the last one, which I think the last one that I'm going to talk about did it. But this is the second one. Um, just all of these guys are shitbags. Also, let me just throw that out there.
I mean, normally
This
if
was
they're a suspect, there's a reason.
yeah, like they're all just
They
assholes.
don't have great reputations.
So that was the most likely suspect. Jimmy Ray was the most likely suspect until 2012. And in 2012, another suspect was discovered as the case file was being gone over again. In the case file, there was a complaint made by Martha Graham about a colleague at the medical examiner's office regarding a death threat. Dr. James Stephen Walter Wilson, who I will from here on either refer to as James, Jim, or Dr. Wilson.
Nah, you need to call him
Dr. James Stephen
John.
Walter Wilson. John
No,
Jacob
it's
Jimmy Hammersmith.
yes, that one.
Yeah, that's quite a name. Um, it's
That's a
just
very religious
this
name.
this guy's just a weirdo. He's creepy. Um, a lot of people, as they're doing their investigating, remember knowing him, but nobody wanted to talk about him. Um, this guy died in 2010 from heart failure. This guy's wife and children asked not to be named. They did give information to the podcast, but did not want to be named in the podcast. So any information about them was bleeped out, like their names and everything. Um, this is the guy who was not connected to, but kind of connected to another unsolved crime in a different area. So Dr. Wilson used to work at a different university, I believe in Kentucky. And there was an unsolved crime there. A female student was found strangled in her car. No robbery or sexual assault was evident. And
Hmm.
yes,
Hmm.
and
Why do
Dr.
you need to
Wilson,
rob people when you're a doctor and you have all the money that you can afford? And
right? It's just, yeah. So that
you
was
have a wife, so you don't
suspect,
need to sexually assault anybody. I mean,
right?
you're kind of crazy enough to kill people and torture them. So, I mean,
Right. And
sexual
he
assault
kind of
is
acted
not
like,
always off the table for those kind of people.
right.
But yeah.
He kind of acted like he knew of the student, but he didn't know her. But she had taken one of his classes, was what was ended up being discovered, or at least I think that this was this one. I didn't actually write that down. Um, so Martha Graham was the one that made the complaint against him at the medical examiner's office for the death threat. The Grahams, which was Martha Graham, and the Wilsons had planned to have dinner at the Wilsons' house the night of February 12th. But Dr. Wilson didn't show up until after midnight.
Because he
And
was
when he got there,
busy torturing and murdering a couple.
he got there and he was acting super erratically, pacing and like peeking out the windows. Um, the Wilsons'
Because he
home
did it.
was exactly a quarter of a mile from where the bodies were found. And
He did it. I changed my mind.
according to Martha Graham, Jim had asked Patricia out a few times, and she had refused him because she was in a relationship. According to friends and family, Jim knew too much and too many details about the crime, and people who loved him, his family members, his friends, the people who counted themselves close to him, described him as a genius, but also that he was volatile. Um,
Isn't that
so,
kind of common though?
yeah. And nobody was like, oh, he was a great guy. Everyone was like, no, he was really, really smart and an asshole. Like, nobody was bullshitting, like, oh, he was, the light of my life. He sucked. Um, and
Keep
then,
talking. I'm gonna grab a blanket.
yeah, so then he writes, wait. So we're jumping back a little bit. Not that this is not the night of or after the murder, but he wrote portions of an anatomy textbook that eventually gets pulled from like college course syllabi and dropped from the academic world for suggestive photos and sexist descriptions of the female anatomy. And Dr. Wilson was like super pissed off about that. He ended up, so Estelle Rainey was a activist who pushed the publisher to take this book off the market, and he actually gave her death threats as well for pushing for the book to be dropped. So he doesn't like women. He doesn't like the feminist movement. He's just pissed off at women. He assaulted a young woman in the Duke parking lot who um, had made negative comments about his anatomy textbook, and threatened many other people who even just questioned things in his book. He threatened to kill his wife multiple times. One of those
Jesus
times,
Christ.
yeah, this guy's fucking psycho. One of the times he threatened to kill her, he came in the kitchen and grabbed a kettle of hot water off the stove and beat her with it in front of their children.
No.
Yeah. That incident landed him in the psych ward.
Fuck him. If it didn't, I'd question.
And that also obviously, I guess I shouldn't say obviously because it's not always easy to leave abuse like that. But in this
Especially when you
particular
make that kind of
situation,
money.
that ended the relationship. The family moved to Indiana. His ex-wife remarried.
Hey.
But Jim did find out where they lived and was writing letters to the boys talking bad about their mother. So he would write them letters talking about how she was a whore and how she was like a slut who like cheated on their dad,
Sir.
which according
Sir.
to everyone was not true. Like he was just a shitbag. But
He
he was trying
asked
to
out the
turn the boys
victim.
right.
He was cheating.
Yeah, and eventually he gets married again as well. Gets into a fight with that second wife, and then takes their 2-year-old son and barricades himself with the 2-year-old in the house for a 5-hour standoff with Memphis police.
Holy shit.
He eventually surrendered and blamed the incident on alcohol. Again, he hated women, constantly threatening them. He did prefer blonde women and frequently had altercations with blonde women. Patricia Mann happened to be a blonde woman. Relevant, maybe, I don't know. He worked at Watt Hospital and would have met Patricia, obviously, Martha Graham told us he asked her out. Um, and Jim had a habit of inserting himself into true crime cases, not just this case, but any true crime case in the area that he lived in. And he would lie about like things to manipulate people into thinking he was more important than he was. So like he would be like, "Oh yeah, I knew that person, and I don't know, I helped them change their tire." Like he would insert himself into these people's lives, and it was just all lies.
What do
So
you want?
some of what was
I don't know.
that?
I think my headphones are acting up.
Some of the
Oh.
some of the things that he did or said, or some of the circumstantial evidence against him, I'm like, but was that him just inserting himself into the case? Like, because this is not the only case he did that with.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Now, this guy, that's the end of the second suspect. This last suspect is still living. He's also a shitbag. And I
We've established
think
that.
he did it, but we'll see. We'll see what you think when I'm done. So
So
his name
he's the
is,
one that everyone thinks did it, right?
yeah,
Okay.
his name is Dr. Robert Carl Britt. He worked
Okay.
at Watt
Another
Hospital
reason why
at the
he doesn't
time.
need to steal.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Harder.
keep going.
He also worked at Watt Hospital at the time. He has a history of violence. Susan Higginbotham was beat senseless in a road rage incident by him. According to her, allegedly, however you want to say it. But he claimed that she started the altercation. He has a history of violence and misogyny. Um, September of 1961, Britt hit a man with his car in the early morning. The man was on a bridge walking, and Britt was driving toward the bridge, and he claimed that he did everything he could to miss the man, but because the man was on the bridge, he couldn't swerve. So he claimed that he stopped, but based on where he said that he hit the man and the track marks and everything, the man was on the hood of the car for about 70 yards, not feet, yards, before the vehicle came to a stop and the man flipped up over the car. What? 70 yards is real far, sir. For you to, if you were trying to brake before you even hit him, like, what?
I think
But
you were just
the
pissed
man,
off.
yeah, the man did die from this, and yeah. Previous co-workers of Dr. Britt heard the profile. So they had FBI profilers make a profile of, like, as they do when they have a murder investigation. So they had them make a profile of the suspect, and previous coworkers of Britt heard this profile on the news and immediately thought of Britt because he had a what they called a reign of terror at Watt Hospital, um,
God.
where he would like steal people's lab coats. Why? He slashed tires and other like stupid shit like that. I mean, not slashing tires, that's not stupid shit. That's like a big deal, but just dumb shit he was doing. So, based on like his actions, his coworkers and people who knew him well were like, "Oh, that's him." Like,
That makes
not
sense.
a good look. One day, I think it was a teenager or like a young teen, Mark Cheney and one of his friends were hitchhiking home from, yeah, they were teenagers. They were hitchhiking home from a playground in Durham where they'd been partying because that's a great place to party. Um, the teenagers were being teenagers. So, first of all, if hitchhiking isn't the most 60s and 70s thing, Like, I feel like the 70s is kind of around the time that people stopped hitchhiking because all of the serial killers kept getting their victims that way. But, like, stop hitchhiking. But they were hitchhiking.
That's why there's so many
And-
murders in the 60s and 70s.
right? And, like, that's why so many of the, like, prolific serial killers were in those decades, because people would
It
just
was
get
easy
into
to
car
do.
with strangers. People didn't lock their doors. Like, yeah.
Or you could just
So,
hire a clown for a boys' party.
no, thank you. Being teenagers, they started flipping off the cars that didn't pick them up. One of those cars that they flipped off slammed on the brakes after he drove by them, got out of the car, pointed a gun at them, pretending to or claiming to be a police officer, and told them to get in the car. Mark Cheney moved in front of his friend and was like, "Fuck you," and was like, "We're not getting in your fucking car." And then the man got in the car and drove away, but Cheney was able to memorize the license plate and the type of car and reported it, and it turned out that that was Dr. Britt. Anger issues. Which, so, funny story, like funny personal story kind of related to this. It's really funny because my grandpa, who recently passed away, would also frequently have road rage incidents. And one time I was in the car with him, and a car in front of him brake checked him, and then the light turned red because we were in town. And my grandpa got out of the car with his flip flop and started chasing this boy. And my mom was so fucking pissed. Anyway, that's a whole other story. My mom was like, "What if they had a gun and shot you? Like, what the fuck are you doing?" Anyway,
Then it's my time to go.
right. The point is, get over yourself. But anyway, back to the case. Britt's address was just around the corner from the empty neighborhood where Pat and Jesse were abducted. He has no alibi for February 12th, but an unverified source said that he was at Watt Hospital, but that's not for sure. Nobody knows. Britt's brother lives in a trailer just around the corner from where the bodies were found. So he is also connected to both crime scenes in some way or another. People who loved him described him as cold and easily upset. Or people that were supposed to love him, I guess, because I don't think I would
Did
be.
he know the victim, the girl?
Yes. Well, yes. She had taken one of his classes because he was like a teacher, like a teaching
So
doctor.
just one of his classes. So it's
Yeah.
okay.
But he did know of her.
But the second the second suspect, who's the doctor, he was the one who did the other murder.
Yeah. Well, they think
Wanted
allegedly.
to date this one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Very similar.
Yes.
Everything.
Yes. This guy was just super. I don't know. You'll have to look up a picture of him after this because he just looks like, yeah, or now, whatever. He looks like what I'm describing. I just can't even.
What's the name? What's his name again?
Dr. Robert Britt. He carried a gun on him at all times and bullied people and harassed them. And this was the 70s, so he truly carried that gun on him at all times, even in the hospital. What?
North Carolina, right?
Yes. Watt, the teaching hospital, or the nursing college, Jesus fucking Christ, finally sanctioned Britt for his behavior, like his, harassment and like bullying of other people in the place. But he ended up getting away with just a slap on the wrist. He didn't really get any actual punishment for this. Then around the time that the crime happened, and then every year for a couple years on the anniversary of the crime, a prank caller called McBane's mother and said hello, this is Dr. Britt. I killed your son. This is like the one fact about him that makes me think it was not him. Because why would you do that? But you might do that if you wanted to throw the scent off your trail. So I don't know. So later in the, like when they reopened the case, detective, I think it was Tim Horn, and a female officer interviewed Britt. They went to his house. He allowed them to come in to speak to him. He would only speak to the male officer. When the female officer would ask him a question, he would respond to the male officer like the female officer did not exist. He was very nervous while talking to them. And
Is this him?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh.
That's not the picture I saw. Yeah, I think so. The picture I saw, he was younger. But yeah.
They're trying to find a younger photo. Actually, back in 2018, like the alumni of Watt Nursing School, they were contacted by the detectives when they reopened this up to find like a younger like picture of him back in the faculty days, and they were trying to locate that picture so they can like match. And I was like,
Right.
but no picture.
Wild stuff.
No picture.
So because he would only speak to the male officer, because he was like, I'll help however I can. The male officer was like, great. You know what would actually be really helpful? A DNA sample and a polygraph to eliminate you as a suspect. And Britt started to hyperventilate. He freaked the fuck out. He gave them his information, like his contact information, and said, yeah, I'll give you DNA, no worries. The police officers left. Less than 5 minutes after pulling out of his driveway, Britt's attorney contacted the police officer and told him not to contact Britt again, and that he would not be submitting DNA or a polygraph test. So,
well, okay then.
Yeah. Dr. Britt eventually opened his own practice, and he hired what was his name? His whole name, I mean. He hired James Brandon Ray to work for him at his practice, who was the first suspect. So those two are connected in that way.
So maybe all three of them did it.
It could be. I really lean towards Dr. Britt, but I could see James Brandon Ray also have been a part of it with Dr. Britt. Because if you remember,
like maybe
James
he got
Ray
the
is the one that stole the rope.
I was gonna say maybe he got the plans to not necessarily the plans, but the items needed.
Right. Yeah.
And a vindictive suitor who was told no.
Yeah.
And then somebody with anger issues, stabby. He probably took it a little too far, which killed them. The other one probably just wanted to like beat the fuck out of them because of he was denied.
So Dr. Britt continued to practice medicine until 2017 when he retired and moved to Florida, where he still lives today. He is still alive. And I verified because at the time of the podcast, it was like 2018. So I did look it up, and as far as I can tell, he has not died since then. He is still alive. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the police scandal that happened. This was kind of confusing. So I'm going to do my best to do it justice. And then, Jesus Christ, I just saw how long this episode is. Sorry, guys. I did tell you in advance.
I was like...
but I'm almost done. So, The police scandal, the very first part of it is that there was not great communication between the jurisdictions. We're all shocked by that, you know?
Where it is.
But a few police officers decided to do a like stakeout to lure out the killer. This was like back in the 70s. They parked their car at the same cul-de-sac where Jesse and Pat were abducted. Um, and there were two officers in that vehicle pretending to be teenagers, you know, making out. And then there were other officers, like surveillance officers, watching to see what happened. The two main investigators do not, they said nobody approached the vehicle. But a third officer named Gary Edgerton wrote in one of the reports that Dr. Britt showed up, pulled up behind the car, got out of his car, started walking toward the driver's side of the parked vehicle that was there on a stakeout, got spooked or looked like he got spooked, turned around, walked back to his car, and left without doing anything. That was, but none of the other investigators that were there on that stakeout, they were like, no, that didn't happen. Which was that significance of that will come back here in a moment.
Okay.
Nick Smith was an investigator on the case. He was then transferred to enforcement and theft, which is part of the, it's like investigators that work closely with the DMV on like vehicle thefts, thefts of identity theft, and like enforcing the different documents. I don't know. I'm kind of confused on what enforcement and theft is, but it's not really important to the story. And then he later ran for attorney general but lost. Political rivals said that his administration was using the DMV as its own private detective agency. Nick Smith's successor at enforcement and theft, Roy McCampbell, planted ecstasy in a patrol car, which was assigned to Lassiter, who was a rival within the agency. In that, another agent was accused with McCampbell, Gary Edgerton, and they pled guilty and were later charged with insurance fraud in a separate incident. So, like, there was just like a bunch of corruption, is the point in this, and that all of that happening made it difficult for like focus on the case to happen, and it took away the like Gary Edgerton's involvement in these other things took away the validity of him saying that Dr. Britt did show up in that report because he's a fucking liar.
Yeah.
Now, the conclusion is that not enough conclusive evidence exists to prosecute any of the suspects. The police believe they have their man. They believe that it is Dr. Britt.
I wonder if he actually did do it, if he will do like
deathbed confession. They don't think so. They said based on his profile, he will not do one.
He's proud.
He will take it to his grave.
Fucker.
But we'll see.
Torture him.
Not enough evidence exists to prosecute any of the suspects. He did refuse to give his DNA, but I thought this was fucking genius, so I had to mention it.
Wait, does he have kids?
No, he does not. Or if he does, they weren't willing to give their DNA either. But they did eventually get his DNA. The way that they did this was fucking brilliant. So a lot of the ways that they would do that was like, if they're a smoker, they would wait for them to flick their butt, grab it, and they have the DNA.
Oh, then it's public property because it's trash.
Yes, but he did not smoke. So he noticed, because they were obviously trailing him for some time because he was their main suspect. They noticed that he frequently went to this restaurant, like this barbecue place. So they talked to the restaurant and they were like, hey, he comes in here a couple times a week. One of these times when he comes in, could you have only one person serve him? Don't have multiple people coming to him from the table to limit cross-contamination. And could you call us? And so they did. And when Britt left the restaurant, that stuff has now been abandoned. It is trash and it is fair game. So an investigator went in and bagged up the fork, the cup, and the plate that Britt had been using at that restaurant, and they now have his DNA. Now, like I said, there were only trace amounts of DNA on the rope, so they don't have enough to test against his DNA. But as advancements come along, hopefully they'll be able to solve this case. The investigators believe that Dr. Britt is the most likely suspect, and I happen to agree. What do you think?
I think okay, yes, I agree it's Dr. Britt. I also have a feeling it's the other doctor just because of like there's more vindictive motive behind it. Like Britt is just an asshole. He just has some anger issues. But what would lead him to do this? Like, I mean, I guess if the kids got into the car with him, like maybe another reason behind this would happen. Like what like maybe Britt did it and he was doing it because he was pissed off and the kids said no. And he was gonna do that to the kids and maybe not or like whatever the case may be. And so then he chooses somebody else. And that's like that was their unfair play in life. The kids survive, they die because vice versa didn't happen. But I don't
I
know,
think the
like
way that he acted when the police talked to him is like super
yeah.
incriminating.
Well, and
Like,
then the fact that he's like, and here's the thing, I get it. And this all depends on like who you are, the background of you've been, because like I know African Americans face a lot of prejudice with cops, and they're not willing to give a lot of, you know, DNA or evidence or anything to kind of help like. But back at that time, like
so my other thought was
if
if
you're
he
not
didn't do this one, if he didn't do this, then he's committed another crime that he doesn't want his DNA in the system for. Like,
maybe, oh, that's a good one.
he's
See,
not
I'm
guilty
sitting
of
here
this
thinking
one.
like if you didn't do it and you know you didn't do it, then why can't you give your shit away? And that's what I'm saying. Like
Right.
where people are like, I shouldn't have to give you my DNA to remain true. But then, like back then in the 70s, though, like there was still a type of
And he's white,
segregation,
so it's like
especially in the
it's a
South.
little
Yeah,
bit
that's what I'm
different. Like
saying. Like he's
he's
white,
white
it's different.
and he's a
So that just
doctor,
makes
so
it
like he's
more.
yeah. So again, if you have any information or know something about this case, contact the Orange County, North Carolina Sheriff's Office at 919-644-3050. And just for my sake, because I'm curious, let us know who you think did it. If you need more information than what I give, because trust me, I did like pare down the information. Go listen to the Long Dance podcast. It's only 8 episodes long. It won't take you very long to listen to it.
Only
And I
it's only 8 hours
highly
worth of your life if you can do it.
okay, no, but listen,
I said
they
if you can
talk
do it.
like this. They talk very slow. So if you want to,
Uh,
you could speed it up. I listened to it on two times because they talked so slow. 2 times is probably too fast for most people. I even had to like rewind it a couple times to re-listen to things. But listen to it at least on 1.2. Don't listen to it at normal speed because they talk very slow. So I say that people are probably like, "Well, I have to slow you down to understand what you're even fucking saying, bitch."
you talk too fucking fast.
But anyway, that is the Valentine's mystery, um, and hopefully one day it gets solved because it is
Yeah. Oh, that's
absolutely
so cool.
technically still
Not cool,
unsolved.
but like that's so
It's interesting
fascinating.
though. Like, listen, I
Yeah.
fell into and then dove headfirst farther
See,
into the rabbit
this
hole
is why I don't.
because
This is why I like try not to do a lot of true crime stuff because that's me. I would get
so
consumed.
yeah, when I listen to like I used to listen to Morbid like religiously, and half the time I would listen to a case and then be like, okay, now I need to go read this book because on that I haven't listened to the more recent episodes, but on their older episodes, Elena would always list her like talk about her sources, and if she read a book as one of her sources, she would talk about it, and I would be like, okay, now I need to devote the next 3 weeks of my life to this case.
Yeah. See, I'd
So
get so devoted I couldn't do it.
yeah.
I'd struggle.
So anyway,
Anyways,
I thought that this was going to be a relatively shorter episode, but now that we're an hour and a half in, I will stop talking about it.
Anyways, thanks for listening, and until next time.
Bye.